In this episode, we're talking with Andrew Steen. Andrew and I served together in the 75th Ranger Regiment, and just a few years later, he's now fresh off winning Shark Tank, where he pitched his startup Laptis, a company dedicated to connecting patients to trusted substance use treatment. Ever wonder how someone with a military background and no prior experience in a specialized industry is able to break in and find traction? Well, stay tuned because we dive into that in this conversation. And here's a hint: it involves donuts. Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military. Andrew, what about you? Is Boston long term, or is that just for school and then you want to relocate?
I don't know. Yeah, this is like my fourth year here. I could see myself going kind of either way. Like it might depend on the startup, which maybe we'll get into, but we're like focused in Massachusetts now. There's a chance we end up like expanding to other states. And I actually really like Boston. I think New England is super underrated, especially from like a nature perspective. I think the biggest complaint people have is the weather. It's obviously pretty cold here, but it's not as bad as it's a better weather than the Midwest, and you just have like very good access to mountains, to sea, to like really cool towns. Of course, it's an hour or two drive, but it's still, I don't know. I like it a lot more than the Midwest, where you kind of don't have that much nature access. So, and it's a really cool city. Boston's like a very cool, has, yeah, a lot of history, very walkable, beautiful. So I'm a fan.
I'll refrain from any heat towards the Midwest because it's such an easy target. It's like, why
Yeah,
even bother? But my wife and I did a Northeast road trip a couple of years ago at this point, and I mean, it should go without saying. You mean, you look at a map, but I was just astounded at how quickly you can get everywhere up there.
yeah,
Amazing nature, to your point.
yeah.
And we also happened to pass through Boston at like 5 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. I'm
Yeah.
fully indoctrinated with the Northeast traffic. It was
Yeah,
a sight to behold.
roads were designed like 400 years. That is one of the other downsides. Is like the city is not like well planned. You know, 'cause obviously it was designed like 400 years ago. So yeah, traffic. It's like the quickest way to get around is biking, actually, because you can just, yeah, traffic takes
Right.
longer.
I
Do you
could
actually
see.
live in Boston?
I'm like in Cambridge, basically like a 2 blocks from the river.
Okay.
I lived here I lived in like Alston my first year here, but yeah, now in like Cambridge, which is like effectively I don't know. Some people think it's a lot different. I'm like it's doesn't nothing changes when you cross the river. So
Right, right.
Andrew, Jack Andrews, he's a physical stud. So I could imagine you like having some case for why a recumbent bike is the way to go. And see you just like whipping through the streets of Cambridge on one of those like layback bikes.
yeah, dude, I actually haven't like cycled outside. I mean, I've, blue biked around and stuff, but like the cycling, some people do it, but dude, it's like really sketchy with the roads. The roads are like they're horrible for biking, and you have to get like really out of the city, and the drivers are insane. And so I just rip it on the trainer, which is obviously way more boring, but it's one of those things because I didn't really bike much until we lived in the middle in Columbus, Georgia, and then we biked a lot because it was like, what else you can do on Saturday? But I for sure took it for granted how nice it was to just have a huge military base where there were just a ton of land and no cars.
Yep,
Hmm.
Yeah, so I'm an
absolutely.
indoor bike or running. Running, it's a great running city, Boston. So that's the preferred method of physical fitness transportation.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's cold.
Well, to kick us off here, we'd love to dive into just, I mean, your background, your military experience. Obviously, it's a broad question, but we'd love to hear where you come from, and then honing in a little bit. The purpose of this podcast is to help people that are transitioning out of the military by telling the stories of people doing great things after. And so we'd love to, focus in on your transition process as well as you kind of tell your story and background.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I just upfront, I think this is a great initiative and a great podcast. It's like a big problem, the like opacity of transitioning in the post-transition life. So I think it's an awesome initiative. And yeah, I really appreciate you taking someone like me on who probably doesn't have great things to say, but we'll see. Yeah, I guess I would start on the military service question. I actually start like before I joined. Like I basically, yeah, I'm originally from Chicago, had like a good childhood, nothing really crazy or super traumatic, and went to Vanderbilt for my undergrad, not really knowing what I wanted to do, but like knowing I cared about being part of something bigger than myself. And then I just saw these people on campus one day in army uniforms and taught, I was like, why are you wearing that? And they explained what ROTC was. And really after like not a ton of deep thought, I like went to one or two sessions, was like, cool, let's rip it. Like I'm in.
I had
And
no
that's
idea.
kind of how I got started. And I think actually looking back on it, obviously there was like a personality match and it matched the mission and stuff I was looking for. But really like the guy that ran it, his name was Chris Black, was just such a I mean, he was just like an incredible leader. And like before you join the military, you have this perception of what the military is. And it's like yeah, it's just like this perfectly like groomed, very fit, incredibly intelligent person who is just like willing to kind of put themselves out there and like do what they say. And he was just all that. People would walk into his office to quit ROTC and they'd walk out with like a scholarship. Like he just was he had this just way about him that was really captivating. And he was, he just had everything. He was a enlisted ranger and he was a night stalker for a while. I was in the 160th for a long time and retired. And that was my first impression of the military. And I think about like if someone else was there, who know, obviously you'll never know, but I think I was drawn to him as much as I was drawn to the institution. And yeah, I think that's important to call out. And yeah, when I was so I was an infantry officer, did the normal kind of infantry training to ranger school to, the big army. And that was great. And I learned a ton. I think when I look back on like that portion of my career or life, I think really the biggest thing I learned there was, I think I went into it like caring a lot about myself and how well I did at Bolick and like was I the honor grad and all this stuff. And, I was very driven initially by like being individually better than everybody else. And I think I was a Derby recycle. And I remember vividly, like when they don't give you feedback. There's like do better Ranger. And then I just, went back and was like, all right, got to
Thanks
do
for the
better.
feedback.
Yeah. But I actually think like what changed from and a lot changed, like that was a period of deep introspection, just being like the loser. And for me, when I did Derby a second time, because I was like, I'm not failing, like there's no way I'm allowing myself to fail. I think what changed was like I reframed the like hardships as this is just me growing as a leader for other people. And like I know it's kind of sounds trite to say that, but it makes like going through stuff way less bad when it's about some bigger purpose. Whereas before it was like I just wanted to be the best for some stupid arbitrary reason. And that makes you much less patient and much less tolerable of the suffering. Whereas when you're like, oh no, I'm here to actually like be a part of this big thing. It's not necessarily about me. It's about my contribution to the overall institution. You're relish in the ability to go through hard things because it means you're growing. And so I look at that and I think like that's such an important thing to go through as like a young person who again like didn't it's I think some people their life throws that at them. And for me, that was really the first time that got thrown at me.
So was
And I
that
think,
was that just
yeah,
wallowing on your bunk at Ranger School during the recycle and like you had this epiphany that came out? What kind of like spurred that change of mindset?
yeah. No, I don't it's hard to pick a key moment in time, but I think I just remember being like there's no way I'm fit. Like I just was like I can't fail that. Like I don't know. It obviously that's like a lot of people say that and it doesn't work out for them, but I wasn't willing to do that. And so I just was like, listen, there's so much in this school that you can't control. And obviously there's a lot of arbitrary things, but what you can control is like how you handle the attitude. And of course, it's one of those things where everyone's like, oh, you're going to Charlie Company, like the RIs are the hardest. Like they have the most recycles. It's like they have the most recycles in the history. Right? It's like everyone says that. And it's like, I just think I was like, I'm not buying into that and whatever. And I just remember like in mountains when, people, do their thing and they quit all the time. It's just, you just see that. And I think a lot of it is that they're not viewing this as a positive trade-off. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people have a bunch of different things to say about Ranger School. Obviously, I just think for me, that's the main thing that I I lean back on, was just having to reconcile with, like, being a very cocky 21-year-old or 22-year-old kid who thought, he was like the Olympic champion. And then you realize you're not. And like, you're just some guy and you got to deal with that. And yeah. And so, yeah.
You're just some guy told to do better at Derby
Yeah, do
fans.
better. I was like, okay, seems clear enough. Like, just
Yeah.
figure it out. Yeah. And then yeah, I think like the second half was, in the Ranger Regiment, and I don't know. I mean, when I think about that chapter, I try not to even like really think about what I did. I feel profoundly lucky to have been there, and I'm sure you feel the same way. Just the osmosis of being in the same room as some of those guys is priceless, really. And so I don't know. I just think like you really see what leadership is all about in that organization. You really see what people who care about a purpose bigger than themselves, what they are, like who they are, what they're about. And that organization is just so fantastic, head to toe. I think about it every single day. And I personally feel like, especially this chapter of my life, I'm in Boston. There's not a lot of vets here. At school, there's a couple. And I just try to take pride in that part of my life. And I try to say like, okay, this person might meet like two Rangers ever in their life. And so what they think of you, they're going to extrapolate to this whole organization. And so I view there to be some, there's a representation that I think we all owe to everybody else in that organization for the rest of our lives, to act in the right way and do hard things and, do the right thing. And because that reflects on the whole organization, not just yourself.
So talk us through. So you finished up your time at Ranger Regiment, had your senior tenure there. What was going through your mind as you were transitioning out, and how did you make the decision to do the joint JD MBA program, and kind of talk us through that chapter?
Yeah, no, I mean, this was one of the hardest decisions I made. I think, for me, like I loved it. I loved being a Ranger. I loved being in the military, and I was never, going to do it forever. And I really, I think I always wanted to do something at the intersection of like entrepreneurship and social impact. And so I just felt like for a lot of reasons in my personal life, it made a lot of sense to make the transition. It was like 2021 when I got out. So there's a lot of personal life things, and it was hard because I don't know, like I felt like I don't know. There was a lot of reasons it was difficult. I felt like I could have given more back, and maybe I was, being selfish about the choice or something like that.
Well, you
But
served six or whatever the number of years
like
ended up being.
five
You
and a half.
served
Yeah, I know, but
very honorably for
I
for five
think
and a half years,
that
and did a
yeah.
lot. So
No, I appreciate anyway. I mean, but yeah, and then why the JDMBA? It's a really good question. I think, like I said, I think if I were to, craft my life how I want, which is it's not going to happen that way, but if I were, I think I would live the next chapter of my life as an entrepreneur, trying to build a company and hope maybe companies that have a profoundly positive impact on the world. And right now we're trying to tackle substance use disorder and access to care, which affects, over 15% of America. It kills a jetliner a day of people. It's a tremendous problem. And I feel like there's a lot of work to be done. I think what we're doing is, showing every day it's making an impact. And so there's that. And I think having the MBA is very clear there. The JD is maybe more for a long-term view on like, if I can ever get to a position in a later chapter in life, I think I would like to re-enter public service at some point. I don't know what that means at all, but I think having a legal training and a legal background is very helpful because so much of what you do in the public sector is touching law and policy, which obviously, is what we're looking at. And so there's other benefits of the JD I'm happy to talk about, but that's kind of the main reason.
So, obviously the caliber of people in regiment is up here, and obviously also at Harvard Business School, of course, it's also, but it's a different type of high caliber individual. So just because I'm
Yeah.
interested, could you compare the two? And of course, the art organizations are so different. So what was your take? You kind of mentioned, the osmosis at Ranger Regiment. Did you feel the same at Harvard Business School, or how is that different?
Yeah, there's kind of two components to it. I think there's one thing on like selecting who's in, which HBS is, they're both really good at. Obviously, they're both incredibly high screening organizations. And I'll get into that in a second. I think where the Ranger Regiment really stands out is like once you're in, like what do they expect of you and like what's the culture there? I think it's like I don't know if there's any other institute. I mean, maybe there's other probably military units that are in the ballpark, but like non-military institutions that demand that level of like commitment and performance and just like selflessness every single day and respect for like the shoulders of giants that you're standing on. I like there's no comparison for that. And that's not disrespect to the school. I just think as a school, you're never going to get there. And like every day at the Rangers, you like show up and like I just vividly remember like walking into the gym early and there's always this game in everyone's mind, like I gotta be the first to show up to the gym because whatever. And like you just walk in, you look around, and it's like you can like taste the testosterone in the air, and it's just like this insane, like, okay, no one says anything, but you just feel like you're there. You have to like okay, whatever recovery day I was doing is in the dumpster. Like I'm gonna go, and it's just like this like thrust of like effort and sacrifice and just like grind that I don't know. It's really just culture, and so
And rank doesn't matter either. That's across the board. Like
what?
no one is
Yeah,
exempt from that.
yeah. I mean the concept of like a bi-weekly challenge. It's just like every 2 weeks there's this like creative random workout that the whole regiment's gonna do, and then you're just pitted against each other. I mean, it's just yeah, it's awesome. And so like to me, that's the biggest thing that stands out. And I think like the people I still think about were that really had an impact on me were just people that just like did what they said. Like they were like, I'm gonna say this, and I also will do it when no one's looking. And that's so powerful because people end up finding out about that. And I think at HBS, it's a different type of really impressive person. I think it's an incredibly international community. It's like 40% international students, which is awesome. And you learn a ton from just like different perspectives on life. And I think I've learned a ton about just like different ways to look at the world. Like my mind has changed on a lot of things since I've been here. And a lot of that is just by talking to people and being around people that have had totally different experiences than you. And you have some incredibly ambitious people that are also trying to change the world in a profoundly positive way. And I think that maybe the difference is though a lot more people at HBS are trying to kind of go off, go in each different directions, whereas the Ranger is very much like we're all here for the collective good of this organization. HBS is like come here and then use it as kind of a springboard for incredible things.
I guess maybe the parallel there is the charter, the regiment charter. Like
Yeah.
everyone goes there, gets the culture, and then takes that out to the regular army to a degree.
Yeah.
So making the whole organization better as well. And I just want to, at risk of beating an already dead horse, but I remember walking into the gym so many days when it was like a recovery day, or I'm going to recover because I'm so sore from the previous workouts. And yet you step in there and if you walk out without leaving a puddle on the ground at the end of the day, then you've failed that morning. So I love
Yeah.
that culture.
Yeah.
Andrew, I want to just for a second go back to approaching a dual degree program afterwards. And if you're comfortable with sharing, did you use GI Bill or Yellow, or like maybe some tactics on people if they're considering a joint program after leaving, and how you went about that process and what would be helpful for others thinking about the same?
Yeah. So I made the decision to like get out and apply for school like in a very quick way. And I took the GRE because it counted for both law and business school. And then what threw a thorn into things was I deployed basically like right after I took the test. So I was like applying at like in odd hours of the day, like super tight. Like it was, I don't know. Yeah, it
They
was not
thought,
ideal.
based off the IP address you were pinging from, they thought you were an international student. So maybe that helped your
Yeah,
case.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so applying was chaotic. But what I think like what my biggest advice would be, I guess I'll break it down like three pieces, like how to approach the application, like like strategically, and then how to increase your chances afterwards, and then like what to do when you get in. So I think like how to approach the application, I would think of it as like in a bit of a stepwise process. Like the first thing I think you should ask yourself is like, what do I want these applicant like the people that read this to think about me in like 2 or 3 sentences? Because realistically, like that they're reading like thousands of these, they're gonna only remember a couple things about you. And then think of what that is. Like, do you want to be an empathetic leader who has like who has gone through like a world of hardship to make a difference, or do you want to be like a maverick thinker that is never pulls any punches. I don't know what it is, but like think of a couple phrases that you want them to remember about you. And then once you know that, different components of the application are better for different kind of pieces of that. Let's just call it an elevator pitch, right? Like, so you need to show academic aptitude, which is very obvious. Like that comes through your tests and your transcripts. I think you also like these schools want you, and I'll just talk about business school for now. They want you to have been successful at whatever you did before because they understand that they're also measured on you getting a job on the back end. So you have to show that you've been a really good employee, whether it's in the military or not. And so like thinking about how do you communicate that is a really important thing. For me, I think that's much better said on a resume than writing an essay about how you're like God's gift to this green earth. And so some people disagree and they'll index on it in other ways, but it's a personal choice and saying, oh, I need to show that I like did really what it means to like be in the Ranger Regiment and what that means versus like other people. Like that's an important thing that not everyone will know that you have to communicate and you have to think about where. And then there's kind of the softer things like your introspection, your empathy, whatever that is, that you also need to communicate. And I think that probably comes through either on the essays or through the letters of recommendation. And I don't know. So like I would have that conversation with myself, be like, this is what I want them to think. And then here are kind of the levers I'm going to pull to communicate each part of that. And then I'm going to go in from there. I didn't do that. I think I would have saved so much time if I had, because I like really rewrote a lot of my essay when I was like, I don't actually think this is communicating anything. So that's how I think about it. And my 2 cents are the resume should show that you're really good at things. And then you should never talk about that anywhere else. Like for me, the essay was a profound moment of growth where like, I like really realized that I needed to change my ways. And then I tried to have recommenders talk about times in which like what they saw in me / times in which I worked well with others, because I think that's more effectively communicated from somebody else versus yourself. And so that was like my way of approaching it. And then like tactically, I think the way to do it as a vet is lean on the vets networks. Like veterans networks are very happy, whether you're a Ranger, do three, like I still do a lot of stuff for 3 Rangers and I love doing it. And I'm happy to write a letter of recommendation for anybody. Like lean on your veteran network because getting feedback on what you're writing for your essays or your resume is really important. You'll be shocked. I had no idea how to put together a resume. Talking to people kind of in industry that can help you say, oh, this is actually a better way to do it makes like exponential differences. And then obviously having multiple sets of eyes on any piece that you write is really helpful. So I never paid for like an admissions consultant. I know some people do that. I don't think it's necessary as a veteran because there's so many vets that are willing to help you. And yeah, just go to an organization, service school, 3 Rangers, something like that. And then also at each school, there are veterans clubs you can reach out to and they'll help you out. And then, yeah, once you get in, I would just say this, like, it's going to depend a lot on the degree and the school and your own situation. And this is a big thing that the veterans clubs will, like, as soon as you get admitted, the vets clubs will all help you how to pay for school and things like that. But the GI Bill is a great resource for paying for school. And yeah, if it's a yellow ribbon participant, then you basically get the whole thing paid for. And so it's if loans or debt, and then you can also qualify for financial aid on top of that too. And so if loans or debt are a concern, chances are you're going to have way less of a problem around that, if any, compared to others. And so it like depends on the school and you can just like Google University X, like GI Bill, yellow ribbon, and it'll be very apparent right away if they take it. And then you can, look up what the GI Bill tables are, cover most, if not all of your tuition from that. And it's not that hard of a process. And the current students easily can hand walk basically everybody through it. And it ends up being like a very seamless process. So it's a great resource to have.
You sort of indicated that you might have coached the people writing you letters of recommendation. I don't think that that's super common, but it's very valuable. And I think just to highlight that for our listeners, like you know what you want the school to know about you. The person writing the letter of recommendation, of course, people are familiar with Harvard Business School, but they might not be familiar with what program you're getting into or what they specifically want to see. So I want people to take away from what you said, like coach the people who are writing those letters and tell them the story you want them to communicate, and it's going to be very helpful. And I might even say as far as write them an example letter of
Yeah.
recommendation, hand it to them and say, hey, like if you can bless off on this and sign it and send it, that'd be great. But put in your own feedback, of course, whatever you're comfortable with. But this is kind of how the vision of what I'd like you to portray about me. If you agree with it, great. I think
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, I guess real quick on that. It's a good point. I think, yeah, what I did is I basically said, here's broadly why I'm going to grad school. Here are all the schools I'm applying to. Here is what they look for in a candidate from their own website. Here are the ways in which you and I, as the recommender, have worked together. And here are topics I would appreciate you writing about and focus areas. Like getting back to the point of like knowing what to pull on where. It does get tricky of like, do you write it for them? Like I didn't write it for them. I think there's like, yeah, like you probably don't want to write it for them, but you can definitely say like here and then give examples and things like that.
Right.
Like you can very much like help them help you.
What sort of are there particular skills or experiences that you pulled on from the military time that you like highly indexed on in those applications or in those conversations? Because I think a lot of people transitioning out, it's common to say, I don't know what translates and I don't know how to translate it. So how did you do that?
Yeah, I mean this is like a money question, and I think this is why this podcast is such a great tool that you're building because I do think there's this huge perception around vets that like, oh, what you did in the military is unique to the military. I don't think that's I think that couldn't be further from the truth. And I didn't really understand that as I was applying. And so when I was applying, like I actually don't think I even like explained it in the best way. I think I was like, oh, leadership. But it's like, what does that even mean? Like what is the military? Yeah. So it was hard for me to know in the moment without the kind of comparison to what the outside world looks like. But what I'd say now is fundamentally what life and business and everything is all about is getting things done. And you could sit in a room and like theorize, okay, we got to go from point A to point B to point C. Like, okay, seems good enough. But in reality, like the problem is like you know where point A is, you know where point C is, you have no idea where point B is. Like point B doesn't exist. It actually is just a non-entity. And in the military, in a Ranger Regiment, and I think especially as an XO, your entire job was to create point B, was to like, hey, like go out there and make point B exist. And that is you. And if you don't, you're fired. We'll find somebody else who can. And like that is what life is like. And I can definitely say in entrepreneurship, like that is so much of what you do is just going out there and saying like, all right, I know I need to get to point C, but there is such a massive gap between where I am and there, and it's not clear how to do it. And I am just going to go figure it out. And there are so many kind of subsidiary skills to doing that that are so important that the military like forces you to learn, like, or you're just going to sit on the sidelines. And so to me, that is so, so, so important. And there's a leadership component to that. And there's just an effectiveness component to that. And so I would say to the people that are getting out or thinking about it, what I would say is listen, think about examples in your life where you've done that, where like, I don't know, like as like, overseas, they're like, all right, we got to like do this thing. We know we want to like do this operation or move this thing from here to there or like do whatever. But like there's this massive problem in the intermediate space and there's no case study on how to solve it because this is a new problem. And like your job is to make that problem go away or solve it. And like that is what I think we did over and over and over again. And like that's what life is like. And so, yeah, like, I don't know, you might not know what like a discounted cash flow is, but you can learn it in a day. You might not know like what a customer acquisition cost to long-term value ratio is, but you can learn that in a day. What's so much harder to learn is how to go from is to create point B, let's just call it. And I think that's what the military does. And it's everywhere in life. Like that is everywhere in life. And it's the most valuable skill. And it's so hard to learn if you were, no offense, but if you're a consultant, like you just tell people, yeah, do point, like a consultant will be like, go from point A to point B to point C, where's my money? And then you in reality are like, oh, by the way, point B isn't like it is in your report that's super sexy and easy to read. And now I have to go invent point B. So that's a long-winded way of saying like just getting things done, which is hard to know until you're out.
That's a fantastic way of putting it. I've never heard of it described that way. And I love the thought of paying a couple $100,000 for somebody to tell you that there's, go find point B when that's what you, yeah, that's
Yeah.
the crux of the problem to begin with.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, you now have started a company. I knew that you had gone to business school and law school, and then I turn around and all of a sudden you've won Shark Tank. So I was like, what happened in between? So I love a couple things here. I love that you started off with essentially developing a personal pitch or a personal mission statement when going to school, and I have to imagine that deeply informed your pitch statement and your mission statement for your company. So can you talk us through a little bit about starting the company? And
Yeah.
it seems like you've been kind of pulling the same thread throughout this whole process over the last 4 or 5 years, right?
Yeah. No, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, as you know, and probably a lot of listeners know, like, so basically what our company's doing is we're trying to streamline access to trusted substance use treatment. And like a little background on it, it's basically, in the military, like substance use problems are just everywhere. It's just so normalized. And, in my own personal life, it's been present in a lot of people very close to me. And it's caused things to end very poorly for a lot of people that I know. And it's always been something that I've thought about as an unacceptable kind of corner of our society, but never really knew what I could do about it. And so that was something that I was just like, how are hundreds of thousands of people dying from overdose each year in a country that has like all this other stuff? Like, how are we accepting this? And so anyway, so this was something that ruminated in my mind for a while. And about a year ago, I noticed that these public defenders, these lawyers, were spending half their days just looking for treatment for their clients, right? They were like doing looking for, they were calling phones that were just dead like dozens and dozens of times. They were filling out these 10-page intake forms for a dozen different centers that weren't going to respond to them. And it was just like an insanely arduous process that was horrible for the patient because they would rarely go to treatment, or if they did, it would take forever. It took up so much time for the lawyer, and for the treatment centers, it's also a not efficient way of acquiring customers. And so, we see this and we're like, okay, this is a horrible way to access care. There's a huge societal problem of people are, addiction rates are skyrocketing, costs are going through the roof, people are dying all the time. How can we not build something that connects the dots? And so there was this temptation to like, oh, let's build some like cool, tech AI tool, whatever, and go sell it. But the first thing we did was not do that. And I think this is where the military came in. It was like the first thing we did was say, let's throw ourselves into kind of the eye of the storm and understand exactly how this process works and where the bottlenecks are. And so the first thing we did was started basically a manual care navigation service ourselves. It was like, just found a lawyer, a clinician, create a 2-minute HIPAA protected intake form, and they would fill it out and we would do everything. Like we do this full search, the full referral, follow up, all that stuff. Some of these patients, it would take 50 hours because a lot of them were incarcerated. And it was like a grueling process with a very steep learning curve. But it allowed us to really build a lot of trust, a lot of knowledge about how this worked. And it also showed us where all the existing solutions were not working or falling short. And so we've subsequently built technology that kind of fills in those gaps. And it's led to a lot of really strong traction for us. But I say the founding story because I don't think I would have done that had I never been in the Ranger Regiment. Like, I know it's not a directly translatable thing, but there was just this, like, again, it comes back to this like culture point of like, it's very apparent that that's the right thing to do, but very few people take that step because it's hard and it's painful and it's like, like, I don't know. There's so many reasons why not. But this culture that I think I was more used to of like, you just have to do, if it's the right thing, even though it sucks, like you have to do it. And like, yes, there's a 3-foot wall every 5 minutes, but like your job is to bash down 3-foot walls. And like, that was what we did for like 6 to 8 months. And so my message to like veterans listening to this is like, you can all be entrepreneurs. There will be a learning curve in a lot of ways. And I learned so much every day, but especially compared to people that might have more of a business background. But what you'll be way more prepared to do is the right thing right away, which is the hard thing. And that will set you up for success in the long term, because the Shark Tank thing, like that donut story, me driving around dropping off donuts, it's funny. That was just the obvious thing to do. And a lot of people are like, it's such a waste of time. Why would you go? I was like, dude, like, I remember when, without naming names, we'd have to go let's say, do a big training event. We needed a bunch of things to get approved. And there were some, people down the block, not Rangers, they were kind of civilians that we needed signatures. And so we would all the time deliver donuts, sit at the desk and answer whatever question they had and it was just like, that was it, because like it's making point B exist, And so it's funny that caught a lot of attention out of Shark Tank, because I didn't really think much of that. It actually wasn't even in our pitch. It was in a question, which was interesting.
I love the correlation there that obviously you have no medical background. You hadn't started a company before. Like all of these things that people would see, and you mentioned the learning curve, all of these things that people would see, and you're like, that's an insurmountable learning curve. How am I ever going to expect to get up that and be a contributing member of society and actually solve this problem? But you've attacked it head on, found point B, and are very actively, working to solve this problem. Are there any tactical ways that you have employed to get up that learning curve as quickly as possible? You probably remember Colonel Tegmeyer, and I say this ad nauseum, but his kind of catchphrase was accelerate the learning curve. He's like, how quickly can you be a contributing member of the regiment? And that's going to be determined by how fast you can learn the vernacular and accelerate the learning curve to learn what you need to. So how have you done that with Laptis and this pursuit?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I would say the best tool for that is just do stuff. Like, I think us being the care navigators, doing that, because it's like talking to people is helpful, and like doing the customer interviews is very helpful and necessary at first. But at a certain point, like there's unknown unknowns, and it's kind of like doing a movement to contact. Like, you don't know where everyone's hiding, you don't know where people are, you know where things are. And the only way to find out is just to throw yourself out there and, wait for those things to emerge. And so I really do think doing something every single day and like suspending disbelief and refraining from over intellectualizing things is so important. And I give the regiment a lot of credit, because so many jobs that like we had to do, like we weren't technically qualified for. I mean, you know what I mean? Like you'd balance you do like all these things, like write multi-million-dollar contracts as like some dumb infantry officer. And there were just so many things that like in every other organization that of peers of ours, you were technically not like qualified to do that. But it was like, hey, this is your job. You better figure it out. Go figure it out. And if you were sitting around being like, oh, well, I haven't had the training, like there's no way, you would never do that. But like the fact that we just got thrown into that deep end and had to swim, I think showed me, in a different setting that like, oh, actually, you can do a lot more than you might think ahead of time. And the only way to really know where that limit is by doing. And so to me, that's really it. And I do, like, again, like I'm not just saying this because this is a veteran podcast. Like, I really attribute so much of where I am today to the military and to the Ranger Regiment and just everything that organization demanded of people.
Yeah, just getting the first few steps done of anything is enough to get the ball rolling. I think, and that's such a good takeaway. Whether people are thinking about their own transition, like do the thing that's going to make you, it's just take the next steps. It's like you might not know how to become an astronaut, but just take the math class. That like it'll start to roll. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway we want people to know for this transition. Just do it now. Like even before you're out, take the necessary steps now. That's going to help progress that transition, and you're going to be further ahead just for choosing to do that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Andrew, can you tell the donut story and or a similar story of like kind of outside the box hustle or thinking? Because I think that hearing stories like that is inspiring for anyone and could help them think outside the box, whether it's networking, applying to school, starting a company, doing little things that are unconventional like that. I think just hearing your story could help them think through that same sort of action for them.
Yeah, no, happy to. And I think actually one of the outside, before I do the donuts, like one of the outside the box stories was us being the care navigators, because we like, we were like, at first I was trying to shadow a bunch of people and it was just not getting off the ground. So I was like, why don't we just do it ourselves? And that was kind of, that was like not what was originally planned, but ended up being effective. Yeah.
Sounds like an officer decision. Let's just do it ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. In-house, baby. The donut story was basically like, on the early days of anything, like you're trying to create something that doesn't exist. So you need people to like bet on you. And it was very hard to get people to bet on me in this space where I was kind of newer and I didn't have a lot of experience, and you're requiring a lot of trust, and it's a very delicate thing you're doing. It's not like you're like getting a taxi ride. Like, you are getting someone into life-saving care, and it's a very delicate process. And I do really appreciate that. And we were not cavalier about it, but still it's very hard to get people to buy in. And so, I would send all these emails and cold calls and no one was responding. And so I was like, all right, what I'm going to do is I know where these offices are. I'm just going to go write a handwritten note and drop off a box of donuts at all these places, over and over and over again. I did it last winter, through the summer or the spring and into the summer. And I actually did it like 3 days ago too, where it's like, I'm just going to drop off box of donuts, a handwritten note. And if someone's there, I'll just talk to them for a couple of minutes. I'm not going to try to like close anything the minute of. I just want to introduce myself and thank them because they have a busy job. And I just want to say, hey, you probably don't get thanked enough. Here's a thanks. And like, by the way, like if you ever need anything, like I'm here to help. And so I did that all the time, and it took a lot of time. And you get like people look at you funny, you get rejected. It's not a comfortable process. Like, it's not my most favorite thing to do, but it's very important. And eventually it got a couple people to be like, okay, they seem nice, like they get it, they care about us. Let's give them a shot. And once you get one, everything changes. Like, once you have one positive use case of what you're trying to do, other people come flocking in. And that's been true at kind of every echelon of the business we're building. We're kind of, we've made some stepwise, progress. And each time we take a new step, it's really hard to convince that first person to jump in with us. And once you do, it's like everybody wants to come in. And I think what the donuts do is they show empathy. They show that we're not just looking at our partners as like a check of the box or a transaction. It's showing me like, hey, we get it. You have a very hard job and you don't have much time to take a break. And probably very few people say thank you. And so by us coming in and showing you support and empathy and love and not asking for something right away, but saying, here's a reward and a thanks, and then kind of just hanging out in the background until very few, but still some of them will come through and want to work with you. I think just shows that we care and we get it. And we're not just like, hey, like pay, do whatever.
So good, man. And on top of that, you're a platinum member at Krispy Kreme now.
I was gonna say the funniest thing was when I first did it, I was like in downtown Boston. I was like, oh, I'll just go to a pastry shop. I bought like 6 pastries and it was like $40 because it was like a nice pastry. Like, oh, I can't do this anymore. And I was like, dude, you idiot. Like, it's Boston and Dunkin' Donuts. And it's like, yeah, like obviously just get people Dunkin' Donuts. And so, yeah, I should get a rewards card. I still haven't, but yeah, I also am proud of myself because I don't eat them. And it's hard to be like with all these donuts and you're like, oh, I'm kind of hungry. Because a lot of times you just do this all day and you're kind of starving. And you're like, damn, I would love one of these like chocolate frosted with sprinkles. But I've never eaten a donut from a potential partner, which I'm
Wow.
proud of. Yeah.
That is
So
a resume stat right there. Well, Andrew, there's one question. It's a two-part question that we ask every guest, and it's an ask and a give. So we'll start off with the first. What's one ask, one way that people could help you, provide value to you, whether it's Laptis or otherwise?
I would say, I mean, I can keep this to Laptis. Like, I think if someone is touched or compelled by our journey and like really our sweat to try to make a difference and help connect people to care, substance use care in a responsible and safe and efficient way, I would love for them to reach out and talk to them and just see if there's any collaboration opportunities. I think we have a number of hospitals that we're working with and some veterans organizations, some big ones that I think are, hope we're kind of in the process there, and some other organizations as well. But would love to just talk to anybody who's either personally or a loved one or just through professional reasons been affected by this, and see if there's any ways to collaborate. And so, yeah, I would love for them to reach out. As a give, I think like the most valuable thing I probably have to give. I mean, not, I'm not some guru. I don't have that much money or anything, but like I love giving my time away, I think, especially to I mean, not just to veterans, but especially to veterans. I think if there's anyone that is interested in, chatting about starting a company or how to make an impact on the world after their military service or going to grad school or like what flavor of donuts the best, I don't know, like whatever it is, like I'm more than happy to talk to anybody and give my 2 cents, obviously knowing that it's just my opinion. But yeah, I guess like broadly speaking, I really do think veterans are so well prepared to just crush it in the military, of course, but also after the military. And I think for me, it was hard and confusing and being like, what's my have this sense of purpose that's so strong and going through that. And I think having a company that has a really big social impact has been helpful for me. But if any veterans are worried about that or concerned about that and want to hear more about how I manage, I'm more than happy to, to help in that way.
That's a great point. You are working on solving a enormous problem that comes with a lot, I'm sure, a massive sense of purpose. So I think that's probably, it sounds like a great way for people that feel like they're losing purpose leaving the military to solve another problem and, find another very big, large purpose.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's a real thing. I know people say like, oh, the purpose, it's a real thing. Like purpose is not something you really have to ever like worry is the wrong word, but it's just so there when you're in the military. Like it is just so clear what your purpose is. And then you get out and it's like, oh, that's like a huge thing that's missing or vague. And putting that like overlooking that is a big deal. And I wouldn't recommend it. And so yeah.
Do you think, a lot of people say, and we've had this conversation before, but some people say lean into what you feel a calling towards and you will eventually find a way to make money with it versus lean it, become really good at something, and then you might start to love it and find purpose in it. And obviously, we're all biased by the actions that we take. But do you feel like have any comments on either one of those? Because I think a lot of people leaving the service are probably like, I don't really know what that big thing is that I feel purpose to pursue. So how would you speak towards that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question actually. And I think purpose can mean a lot of different things. I mean, I have kind of this for me, I think it should be rather big, but that's just my opinion. I think for a lot of people, there's enough purpose, and I just want my kids to have a better life than I did, and there's a lot of nobility in that. And I think like someone's purpose is going to be informed by like their path. You know what I mean? Like how they were brought up and what kind of challenges they've had in life. And so I don't think it should be a reductive in the sense that everybody must share the same scale or scope of purpose. But for me, so I think like the first step is just to figure out what that is. And if your purpose is like, if it's more flexible, meaning you just really are concerned about having a stable life for your kids because maybe you didn't have one, or maybe, there's some other motivating factor there, then there's a lot of things you can do. But if you're like, listen, I don't think I'll be like satisfied with myself if I don't take a big swing at a big problem, then obviously you're more limited. And so I think that's kind of the first step. As far as passion versus money, I mean, it's a great question. I know it's like a cop-out answer, but why else go to law school if you're not going to learn how to give an it depends answer? And so it obviously is like a personality dependent thing and what your passion is. I guess the way I've solved that is I think having a higher purpose solves for a lot of downstream day-to-day things. Like the things I do day to day, like as an entrepreneur, like a lot of what you do is not like sexy or fun. It's like very grueling. It's very hard. You get rejected all the time. You get disrespected. There's a lot of things that are not fun in a vacuum, but because they're under this umbrella of you're actually doing something that matters and you're learning a ton and you're growing a ton, it makes it worth it. And so I guess another way of framing this is how can you solve for the things you might not be passionate about? Maybe that's money, like you said. Maybe it's purpose. Maybe it's learning or growth or something else. Because if you just took all the day-to-day tasks of an entrepreneur and you put them into another job that didn't have that same purpose or the same benefits, no one would sign up for it. And I think a lot of the reason to be an entrepreneur is the growth, the learning, and the impact, which come be like a lot of the reason that those are valuable is because of the hard things. So there's a relationship there. And so anyway, like I think the dream is to do something that you're passionate about that can make you a lot of money. And then passion can lie at different scales. Like, yeah, like I like the Packers, but the Packers are making me zero. In fact, they're making me negative money. But like there are other things I'm passionate about too, such as solving this big problem that we're working on and others. And so what passion points can I index on that also lead to a hopefully, sustainable life? That's maybe the framework that I've taken.
Can you speak to the choice of using the word use as opposed to substance abuse?
Yeah, it encompasses more people's situations. I think the field of substance use disorder or just substance use in general is one that has a wide, variation of practices and opinions. And so something that at Laptis we're very cognizant of is we don't want to put our thumb on the scale of saying we're betting on one modality versus another. We want to actually empower the kind of clinicians, the frontline workers, the scientists on the ground to be able to make those decisions. And actually part of the reason that there's a problem in this space is because finding information and communicating it is so difficult given how fragmented the landscape is and the ecosystem is. And so, I think we're trying to use terms that are as broadly encompassing as possible. So yeah, that's the substance use, but it's just kind of a personal choice.
Well, Andrew, you're living the great entrepreneur metaphor. You're driving around all day with a box of donuts, several boxes of donuts,
Several, yeah.
putting out fires, solving problems, figuring things out, but not getting to eat any of the donuts. But in the short term, the donut eating comes down the road, comes later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the work that you're doing, Andrew. Thanks for what you're doing for society, but also your ability and willingness to help other veterans that are going through their journey and searching for their purpose as well. So as we conclude here, any final thoughts or maybe one piece of advice for someone transitioning out or considering transitioning?
Yeah, no, I just want to say thanks to both of you for having me on. This was great, and I love the initiative. Yeah, I think if I were transitioning again, I would say I'll give a couple quick pieces. One, I think is really think about this purpose point a lot. Purpose and impact, right? They intersect and they can happen at different scales, and it's a personal choice, but it's really important because I think that informs basically a lot of the way you live your life afterwards. Second, I think just don't listen to the people that don't see. You're going to always encounter people in life that don't see what you bring to the table and don't believe in you. If you let that deter you, then your life is going to be way worse and way harder than it would be if you didn't. And so I guess my advice is bet on yourself, really think about instances in which you've kind of gone from point A to, created point B, let's just call it, and lean into that and believe that you can figure it out, because I guarantee you had to figure a lot of stuff out in the military that in retrospect but in the moment it was a steep mountain to climb. And so don't be deterred by the people that just don't see it and say you don't have traditional experience. Lean into it and really take a big swing, because you have a huge network that you can fall back on. And it's not like you'll be unemployed forever if things don't go well. And so I really do mean that. Yeah. And then I think the last thing is just really remember the profound lessons that you learned in the military. Remember them. Like I said, I've leaned a lot on the lessons I've learned and the people I saw lead and the things I did to inform this chapter of my life. And I don't think I'd be nearly close to where I am without that. And so don't just forget it, even if it ended poorly or whatever. Remember what made the military, if you're in the Ranger Regiment, what made the Ranger Regiment a great place, and lean into those things and try to kind of bring them into the next chapter of your life, because they'll take you very far.
Really well said, man. Well, we'll drop your LinkedIn and Laptis links in the show notes so people can follow along with what you guys are building. And thanks again for doing this. This has been great catching up.
Yeah, I appreciate it, dude. This was awesome. I wonder if Chris Haskell's going to watch. I don't know. What do you think? We'll see. This will be a test. If he hits us up, maybe it means he made it to the end, but probably not.
We'll definitely keep that in there so we can see how far he listens, what his attention span is these days. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next mission.